They said it was just a lesson. At 16, my parents left me at an old train station in the middle of nowhere and never came back. I waited, called, hoped. But that day, something inside me broke. I never went home. 20 years later, they found me, not out of love, but desperation. They wanted money, control, redemption. What they didn't expect was that I had built a life without them, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. It's wild how life can flip in an instant. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Type 1 if you're curious how it ends. The day they left me is burned into my memory like a scar that never fades. It was July, the air thick with heat, and we had just left my sister Vivian's college town after another strained family weekend. As usual, Vivian played the golden child, perfect and obedient. I was the one constantly compared, criticized, and tested. My parents, Magnus and Celeste, treated me like a project that needed fixing, someone they could mold through shame, silence, and manipulation. That Sunday afternoon, the car slowed near a forgotten train station off an Alabama back road. Dad muttered something about a soda, and Mom flashed that brittle smile of hers, the kind that always meant trouble. I got out to grab their drinks, thinking it was just another small errand, but when I turned around, the car was gone, completely vanished. At first, I thought it was a prank, or maybe they had just moved the car. But when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother, my heart stopped. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a lesson in problem solving," I called, straight to voicemail, again and again. Panic turned to disbelief, then to something colder, familiar. This wasn't the first time they had abandoned me emotionally or physically. At 13, they locked me outside during a thunderstorm for forgetting to do a chore. At 14, they made me walk 6 miles home from school in the pouring rain because I missed the bus. Their punishments were always framed as character building. They believed suffering made me stronger, or maybe they just didn't care. Standing there with nothing but a crumpled $5 bill and a few summer job savings, I realized something crucial. I couldn't rely on them. Not for love, not for safety, not even for the basics of human decency. So I did what any scared, furious, determined 16-year-old would do. I blocked their number. Then I called the only person who had ever truly shown me kindness, my Aunt Marigold. She came for me without hesitation, no questions, no judgment. That night, I slept on her couch, staring at the ceiling, knowing my life had changed forever. I didn't go back. I never saw my parents again. Over the next few years, I clawed my way forward. I worked minimum wage jobs, lived in cheap apartments, studied by the light of street lamps when I couldn't afford electricity, but I kept going. I graduated college with honors, built my company brick by brick, and never looked back, until they came looking for me. It started with a voicemail from Vivian. A name I hadn't heard in 20 years suddenly flashing on my screen felt like a ghost reaching through time. Her voice cracked with emotion, pleading with me to call her back, saying Mom and Dad had found me and needed help, as if that explained anything, as if that erased everything. I didn't respond, not at first. But the messages kept coming, dozens of them, from unknown numbers, from Vivian, and even one from a name I thought I'd never see again, Magnus Holloway, my father. His message wasn't remorseful. It was bitter, slurred, entitled. "We made you, Abigail. Everything you have is because of us. You think you're better than us?" I wasn't shocked. I was furious. For 20 years, I had lived without them. I built Haven Developments from the ground up with nothing but determination, grit, and the unshakable belief that I could create something better than what I came from. I had employees now, clients, a name people respected, but suddenly they were trying to reinsert themselves into my life, not because they missed me, not because they wanted reconciliation, but because they wanted something. Vivian finally admitted the truth when we met for breakfast. She walked into that Denny's like someone carrying the weight of 2 decades of secrets. She looked older, tired, a little more human than the perfect daughter I remembered. When she sat down, she still called me Abby. I told her I wasn't that girl anymore. She didn't argue. Over lukewarm coffee and forced small talk, the truth came out. Our parents were broke. My father had gambled away their retirement, my mother had spent recklessly, the house was in foreclosure. They were drowning in debt, and they saw me, their abandoned daughter, as their lifeline. I could have laughed if it hadn't been so insulting. Vivian pleaded for empathy. She said they were desperate, that they were sorry, in their own way, But sorry didn't erase the image of a 16-year-old girl standing alone at a train station with nothing but a vending machine soda and a phone full of unanswered calls. I told her the truth. I didn't owe them anything. She flinched at my words like they physically stung. But I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to make her understand. They made their choice that day at the train station. They chose control over compassion, power over love. I didn't care if they lost everything now. They had already lost me a long time ago. When I walked away from that table, I felt like I had finally closed a door that had been cracked open for far too long. But closure, it turned out, was just wishful thinking. Because what they wanted wasn't just money or help. What they wanted was control. And when I said no, they didn't retreat quietly. They retaliated. First with guilt, then with manipulation, and finally with a public attack that would threaten everything I had worked for. They wanted back into my life. I had no idea just how far they were willing to go. It began with Facebook. One morning, Jenny, my assistant, stepped into my office, face pale, phone in hand. "You need to see this," she said, almost apologetically. I took her phone, half expecting some minor client complaint. But what I saw made my stomach turn. A public post. A lie dressed as a cry for help. Our daughter abandoned us in our old age after all we sacrificed for her. We raised her to be strong, and now she treats us like strangers. We're heartbroken. Below it, another, and another. Photos of me taken from old family albums, twisted captions meant to paint me as the villain. Hundreds of comments flooded in, many from strangers who had no idea who I really was. So ungrateful. Disgusting how kids treat their parents these days. Money changes people. What a shame. I hope she regrets it when they're gone. They didn't stop there. People began tagging Haven Developments, leaving one-star reviews, accusing me of being cold, deceitful, emotionally unstable. It wasn't just personal anymore. They were going after my livelihood. I felt the panic clawing at my throat, but I kept my voice steady. "Who else knows about this?" I asked Jenny. "Some clients, a few staff. They're watching to see what you'll do." I knew silence wasn't an option, so I did the one thing I had always been too afraid to do. I spoke the truth. I opened my own social media account and posted, "Some people rewrite history to avoid accountability. I won't let them." I was left at a train station at 16. I built my life without them. Now they want to destroy it because I said no. Not this time. It went viral within hours, but they weren't done. A few days later, I was reviewing blueprints when Jenny buzzed through the intercom again. "There's an elderly couple here. They say they're your parents." I froze. "Tell them I'm in a meeting." "They're making a scene." Of course they were. When I stepped into the lobby, I saw Celeste first. Knees on the floor, clutching a tissue. Tears that didn't reach her eyes streaming down her cheeks. Magnus stood beside her, eyes burning, daring me to flinch. "You won't even speak to your own mother?" she wailed, loud enough to turn heads. I clenched my jaw. "Leave. Now." "You think your money makes you better than us?" Magnus barked. "I gave birth to you," Celeste sobbed. "We raised you." I stared at her, emotionless. "You are nothing to me." Gasps echoed through the lobby. Phones recorded. A live tragedy for public consumption. "You'll regret this," Magnus hissed. "No," I said calmly, signaling security. "You will." Even as they were escorted out, I knew this wasn't the end. And it wasn't. The next day, I received a legal notice. My parents were suing me under filial responsibility laws, attempting to force me to support them financially. The very people who left me behind without a second thought were now demanding I pay for their failures. They had used guilt, they had used shame, and now they were using the law. But what they didn't realize was that the frightened 16-year-old they left behind, she didn't exist anymore. The girl they abandoned at a train station had grown into a woman who knew how to fight back, and I was done letting them control the narrative. After I received the legal summons, I met with my lawyer, David. He scanned the documents and leaned back with a grim expression. "They're attempting to file under filial responsibility laws. Texas doesn't have strong enforcement for those statutes, but if they stir up enough noise, press, opinion pieces, online backlash, it could hurt your business." "They're not suing for justice," I muttered. "They're suing for attention." David nodded. "And hoping you'll cave to protect your reputation." But I wouldn't, not anymore. That night I drafted a statement. Not vague, not polite, the unfiltered truth. At 16, I was left at a train station with no warning, no goodbye. My parents disappeared and never came back. For years, I struggled to survive while they vanished without a trace. Now they want to rewrite history. They're suing me not because I owe them, but because I finally said no. I won't be silent anymore. The post exploded online. Thousands shared it. For the first time, I saw the tide turn. Comments poured in, this time filled with support, outrage on my behalf, and disbelief at what my parents had done. This is heartbreaking. How could any parent do this? You don't owe them anything. You saved yourself. They abandoned you and now they want your success? No way. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been manipulated by guilt masquerading as love. 3 days later, Vivian called. "They've lost everything," she said quietly. "The house, the car, their savings." I stared out at the city from my office window, my voice low and unshaken. "That's on them." "They're saying it's your fault," she whispered. "Of course they are." I wasn't surprised. "But you know better." She didn't argue. That weekend, I drove past the house I once called home. It looked smaller than I remembered, tired, forgotten. A crooked for sale sign stood in the yard, half buried in weeds. I waited to feel something, triumph, vengeance, justice. But all I felt was relief. Not because they had lost, because I had finally let go. They couldn't touch me anymore, not with lies, not with lawsuits, not with twisted words about duty and blood. I had won, not by destroying them, but by refusing to be destroyed. That night, I sat on my balcony, wine in hand, Austin stretching out in golden light before me. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was healing. No tension in my shoulders, no fear of the next text, call, or confrontation. Then came the knock. I opened the door to find Vivian, eyes swollen, voice hoarse, clutching a memory that no longer belonged to me. "They're still our parents," she whispered. I shook my head. "Not mine." She cried, but I didn't. I simply closed the door. Not in anger, but in peace. They could scream, lie, beg, or sue. But none of it mattered, because I wasn't looking back anymore. I was free. Because I wasn't looking back anymore, I was free. Not the kind of freedom you shout about. The quiet kind. The steady kind. The kind that comes when the weight you've carried for years suddenly disappears, and you realize it was never yours to hold in the first place. I spent the following week in silence. Not hiding, not retreating, just living. I showed up to work like normal, met with clients, finalized 2 new development contracts. My team moved forward, stronger than ever, as the false allegations crumbled under the truth I had finally spoken. Their lawsuit dropped within days. Public opinion had turned so sharply against them that even their own lawyer abandoned the case, citing reputational concerns. The media caught wind of it too. An expose ran on a major blog titled "The Parents Who Sued Their Daughter for Saying No." And just like that, the last of their control evaporated. But for me, the real turning point wasn't the legal win or the social vindication. It was something far simpler. It was dinner. That Sunday evening, I sat across from Aunt Marigold at a little Mexican restaurant tucked away in East Austin. The smell of grilled peppers and cilantro wrapped around us like comfort. She lifted her margarita with a grin. "To peace," she said. I smiled. "To peace." We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She was the only one who had come for me that night 20 years ago. And she was still here. No strings, no expectations, just love. After dinner, I got in my car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. I scrolled through my contacts until I found 2 names, Magnus Holloway and Celeste Holloway. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over them like a final test. Then I blocked both, not in anger, in liberation. I no longer needed to hope they'd change. I no longer needed to brace for the next ambush. I didn't need closure from people who never cared to offer it. I had created my own. As the weeks passed, people reached out. Some told me their own stories, being cast aside, manipulated, shamed into silence by the people who were supposed to love them. Others just thanked me for saying the thing they hadn't yet found the strength to say out loud, that sometimes family isn't love, and love isn't supposed to hurt. I learned something else, too. Something I wish I had known when I was 16, standing alone on that train platform. You don't owe anyone your suffering. Not your parents, not your past, not anyone who demands your pain as proof of your loyalty. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself healing. You owe yourself freedom. And if walking away is what it takes to claim that, then walk. Run if you have to. because choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you whole. So if you're reading this and you've ever been made to feel small, selfish, or ungrateful for setting boundaries with toxic people, especially when those people share your blood, let me say it plainly. You are allowed to let go. You are allowed to be free, and you are not alone, not anymore.